I never thought I would understand life the way I do now. I thought being a man was straightforward: work hard, speak less, act strong, but somewhere along the way, I realized I had no idea what strength truly meant. My journey started in the most unexpected way, and it changed me in ways I could never have predicted. It all began with a challenge, well, more like a dare from my closest friend, Lily. She's brilliant, fearless, and annoyingly perceptive. She looked me straight in the eye one night over coffee, and said, "You don't know half the world, you don't understand half the people. You're not even a man, really." I laughed it off, but the sting lingered. She continued, "I dare you to live as a woman for a week. Experience it. You might hate it, or you might learn something about yourself." I agreed without thinking. It felt like a joke, a harmless experiment. But the next morning, my life shifted. I walked into her apartment, and there it was, a wardrobe full of dresses, blouses, skirts, scarves, everything I had never touched. "Pick something," she said, and I froze, staring at the colors and textures. Silk, chiffon, cotton, soft fabrics that felt like they belonged to someone else entirely. I chose a simple dress, pale blue with subtle patterns, and hesitated as I slipped it over my head. It clung to me in ways I wasn't used to. The mirror reflected a stranger, my own face, softer somehow, framed differently, eyes wider than I remembered. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and strangely alive. The first day out was the hardest. Walking through the streets, I felt invisible and hypervisible at the same time. People's glances lingered in ways I couldn't predict. I had to learn how to walk differently, hold myself differently, even breathe differently. Every gesture carried weight. Every step felt like a test. And then came the reactions. Some were kind, some were indifferent, some were cruel. A man sneered at me on the subway, and I felt fear claw through my chest like nothing I had felt in years. I realized how often I had walked past women without noticing the subtle threats, the constant assessments, the invisible pressures. By the third day, I was exhausted. But Lily kept pushing me gently. "Notice everything," she said. "Feel everything. Don't shy away." So I did. I noticed the subtle smiles of strangers, the unspoken support of other women, the way people stepped aside or held doors. I noticed my own thoughts changing. I felt empathy that had been dormant. For the first time, I understood how fragile courage could be and how brave ordinary women had to be every single day. At work, the challenge became more intense. My colleagues didn't know. Presenting as a woman in meetings, I saw bias and assumptions firsthand. Ideas that were brushed off from my male persona were now scrutinized, sometimes with patronizing advice, sometimes with unexpected admiration. I navigated conversations I had once taken for granted, and it humbled me. I realized how often I had assumed authority without question, how much privilege I carried unknowingly. But it wasn't just about struggle. There were moments of sheer joy. I remember sitting in a quiet cafe, feeling the fabric of my dress around my legs, sipping coffee, and watching life flow around me. A little girl smiled at me from the next table, and I felt a connection that was pure and simple. I laughed at the absurdity of it, at the lessons I was learning, at the absurd beauty of human existence. By the fifth day, my friends started noticing subtle changes in me: my tone, my patience, my attentiveness. They asked why I was quieter, softer, more reflective. I didn't answer immediately. I was still processing. But deep inside, I knew something had shifted irrevocably. The hardest moment came unexpectedly. I was walking home one evening, feeling the weight of the week, and a man began following me. Panic rose in my chest like a tidal wave. My heart pounded. My instincts screamed for action. I realized how often I had ignored these fears in the lives of others. I called Lily in a trembling voice, and she guided me to safety over the phone. Later, sitting in my apartment, trembling but unharmed, I wept. Not just from fear, but from understanding the quiet bravery it takes to live under constant scrutiny, under constant potential threat. By the seventh day, I was different. I had learned humility, empathy, patience, and courage. I had walked in shoes I never thought I'd wear, felt emotions I had ignored, and seen the world through eyes that were both mine and not mine. The mirror no longer reflected a stranger. It reflected a fuller version of me, a man who understood women, who understood vulnerability, who understood love in its quietest, most human forms. When I stepped out of the dress for the last time, I felt a pang of loss, not for my identity, but for the empathy I had gained. I realized that being a better man didn't mean being tougher, louder, or more in control. It meant understanding others, recognizing privilege, facing fear, embracing vulnerability, and choosing kindness even when it wasn't convenient. I went to see Lily, and she smiled knowingly. "So?" she asked. "So," I said, my voice steady, "I get it. I get what strength really is. And I'm never going to take it for granted again." She nodded. "Good. Now go live it." And I did. Every day since, I carry that week with me. In the way I listen, in the way I speak, in the way I treat people, I carry it. I learned that empathy doesn't come from theory or philosophy, it comes from experience. Courage isn't about dominance, it's about compassion. Love isn't about possession, it's about understanding. Being a woman for a week didn't make me less of a man. It made me more fully human. I've never told anyone this before, not like this. But if there's one thing I want you to understand, it's this: to truly be a better man, you sometimes need to step outside yourself, feel the world as another, and let it change you. Because real strength comes not from what you dominate, but from what you embrace, what you protect, and who you choose to become. So here I am, still me, still learning, still trying. But I know one thing with certainty: I am a better man, not in spite of, but because of, having lived as a woman, even if only for a week. And that lesson will stay with me forever. I look in the mirror now and smile, not because of what I see, but because of who I've become. And maybe, just maybe, the world will be a little kinder, a little more understanding, because of that. It's strange, isn't it? How changing your clothes, your posture, your voice even for a week can change the way you see everything. But it does. It changes you. And if it can change me, it can change anyone. So take the step. Walk a mile in someone else's world. Feel it. Live it. And you might just come back a better version of yourself. That's what I learned. That's what I carry. And that's the truth I can't keep to myself any longer. Because sometimes, to be truly strong, you have to be brave enough to be vulnerable. And sometimes, to be a better man, you have to be a woman. After that week, life didn't magically become easier. But it became more honest. I noticed things I had never seen before: the way people's expressions shifted when they felt seen, the subtle kindnesses that go unnoticed, the quiet battles that everyone fights alone. It was humbling, to say the least. I started with small changes. I listened more. I asked questions instead of giving answers. I held doors without thinking about it, but not as an obligation, as a recognition of the small struggles people navigate every day. And I began to notice how deeply these gestures were appreciated. Sometimes a simple smile, a simple acknowledgement, carried more weight than any grand gesture I had ever made as a man. At work, the transformation was subtle but undeniable. I found myself advocating differently, defending ideas more gently yet more firmly. I spoke with empathy, not just authority, and something shifted in my relationships with colleagues. Women I had once overlooked began to trust me in ways I hadn't imagined. And I realized that true respect doesn't demand dominance, it earns itself through understanding, consistency, and compassion. But the hardest part was internal. I had glimpsed a different way of being, and it was tempting to cling to it, to retreat into that world where vulnerability was not weakness but a form of power. I had to reconcile that with the life I had before, the expectations placed on me, and the identity I had known all my life. I wrestled with fear that people would misunderstand me, fear that I had become soft or too emotional. One night, I sat alone on the balcony, staring at the city lights, thinking about Lily's challenge. I realized that the most important part of the transformation wasn't the dress, or the makeup, or even the week itself, it was the awakening inside me. The world hadn't changed, but I had. And with that awareness came responsibility, to carry it forward, to act with integrity, and to remember the courage it took just to exist as someone else. Then came the moments that truly tested me. My father, a man of stoic principles and rigid expectations, asked me one afternoon why I seemed different. I could feel his suspicion, the way he measured every word I said. And yet, I chose honesty. I told him about the challenge, about the week, about what I had learned. At first, there was silence. Then, a long sigh. He didn't fully understand, but he nodded. "If it made you better, I'll trust it," he said quietly. And in that brief moment, I felt a kind of acceptance I had never known before. Friendships deepened as well. Some laughed at my story initially, teasing me mercilessly, but the laughter softened into genuine curiosity. Conversations became more layered, more meaningful. People shared experiences they had never revealed before, and I realized the simple truth: vulnerability invites connection. Being open, being willing to feel, being willing to learn, that's what builds trust. Even in love, the transformation had an impact. I had been dating someone for a while, someone I cared about deeply, but our conversations often skated on the surface. After the week, I started sharing the rawer parts of myself, the fears, the lessons, the moments that had shaken me. She listened, and for the first time, I saw our connection deepen beyond infatuation into understanding. Love, I realized, is not about performance, it's about presence, empathy, and courage. And I noticed myself in unexpected ways. I was kinder to strangers, more patient with colleagues, more forgiving with friends. I laughed more freely, cried more openly, and felt emotions with a clarity I hadn't experienced before. There was still fear, still doubt, but they no longer controlled me. I had learned to face them, to inhabit them, and to emerge stronger. The city felt different now. Walking down familiar streets, I saw the little battles, the quiet victories, the unspoken stories of the people around me. I recognized the weight of being human, the courage it takes to live authentically, and the beauty in simply persevering. And I carried that awareness with me, like a lantern in the dark, guiding not only my actions but my heart. Months later, I met with Lily again. She smiled knowingly, the same way she had the first day. "So, you're a better man now?" she asked. I smiled back, quietly, with a depth that hadn't been there before. "I am," I said. "But not because I changed outwardly. Because I learned to see, to feel, to understand. And that makes all the difference." She nodded. "Good. That's the lesson, not just for you, but for everyone." And that's when I understood the full weight of what had happened. The challenge wasn't about identity, it was about humanity. About empathy. About courage. About becoming a person who could truly stand beside others, not above them. Now, when I look back at that week, I don't see it as an experiment. I see it as a turning point. A doorway into understanding. A mirror that reflected not just who I was, but who I could be. And every day since, I strive to live in that reflection, with honesty, with compassion, and with the courage to embrace vulnerability, knowing that it's the truest measure of strength. The moral is simple, yet profound: to become the best version of yourself, sometimes you must step into someone else's shoes. Not to escape who you are, but to expand who you can become. I became a better man not by denying myself, but by embracing the full spectrum of human experience, and that, I believe, is a lesson worth sharing. And if my story touches even one person, if it inspires empathy, courage, or understanding, then the journey was worth every step. Because life isn't about rigid roles or appearances, it's about connection, love, and the relentless pursuit of becoming a better human. I've learned that being a better man isn't about strength or control, it's about listening, seeing, feeling, and acting with compassion. And in that, I found something far greater than I could have imagined: myself. Every time I pass a mirror now, I don't just see a man. I see someone who has walked in another's world, faced fear, embraced vulnerability, and emerged not diminished, but profoundly human. And that, I realize, is the most powerful transformation of all. Even now, months after that week, the lessons linger in ways I hadn't anticipated. It's not as if I walk around in a dress every day, but the way I see the world has shifted permanently. I notice the small things, the way someone hesitates before speaking, the subtle sighs of exhaustion, the way kindness can ripple quietly but profoundly. I find myself offering help before being asked, listening before responding, and observing before judging. One afternoon, I was walking through the park when I noticed a young woman struggling with a stroller while balancing a heavy bag. My first instinct, a reflex I didn't know I had, was to rush over and help. She looked at me, hesitant, perhaps unsure of my intentions, and I smiled gently, making it clear it was only support she needed. As we lifted the stroller together, she whispered a quiet thank you, and I felt a warmth I had never associated with doing the right thing. It wasn't about being praised, it was about connection, about noticing someone's struggle and easing it, even in the smallest way. At home, I started journaling more intentionally. I wrote down moments of empathy, small victories, and reflections on my interactions. I realized that transformation isn't a single moment, it's a series of micro-decisions, repeated over and over, that shape who you are. Sometimes it's easier to ignore these moments, to walk past them, to stay in your comfort zone. But the real challenge, the real growth, happens when you lean in, when you choose awareness over indifference. Family life became different, too. My mother noticed subtle changes in me, how I paused to listen rather than lecture, how I acknowledged her advice rather than dismissing it. My relationship with my sister deepened. She laughed at my story initially, but then asked questions I hadn't expected. We talked for hours, about gender expectations, about fear, about identity, and about the pressures we often hide from each other. I realized that empathy isn't just outward, it's inward, too. Understanding yourself fully allows you to understand others more deeply. At work, I noticed a shift in team dynamics. My colleagues, men and women alike, responded differently. Ideas were received with more openness, conflicts were resolved with more thoughtfulness, and respect became reciprocal rather than assumed. I was surprised at how small acts of awareness could ripple through an entire environment. It wasn't performance, it was authenticity. It was living the lessons, not just learning them. One evening, I received a message from Lily. She had been watching quietly, as she always does. "You're carrying it well," she wrote. "Not everyone does. Most people stop at awareness. Few act on it." Her words struck me. Awareness is only the first step. Courage is acting on that awareness, even when it's inconvenient, uncomfortable, or unnoticed. That's the difference between knowing something and living it. I reflected on the week-long challenge constantly. The fears, the vulnerabilities, the small triumphs, they weren't experiences I could neatly categorize or forget. They had become part of me. I remembered the night I had been followed, the fear that had gripped me, the helplessness, and how a simple call to a friend had guided me to safety. That fear taught me more about courage than any lecture or self-help book ever could. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the willingness to face it and move forward anyway. And then there was love. Not romantic love alone, but love in its quiet, human forms. Love that shows up in listening, in patience, in unspoken understanding. I had been dating for a while before the challenge, but after it, I started engaging differently. I noticed the little anxieties, the subtle gestures of affection, the ways we shield ourselves from vulnerability. I leaned into these moments, not with expectation, but with awareness. And love deepened not because the other person changed, but because I had changed. Sometimes, I catch myself thinking about the week and smiling at the memory of the dress, the unfamiliar movements, the cautious steps. It wasn't glamorous or dramatic, it was humbling. It was ordinary life, amplified by awareness and reflection. And in that ordinariness, I found extraordinary insight. I began volunteering in small ways, offering mentorship to younger colleagues, helping people navigate challenges I had once ignored. The empathy I had cultivated wasn't limited to family or friends, it extended to strangers, to community, to the world around me. It felt natural, almost inevitable. Once you have felt life from another perspective, you can't unfeel it. It stays with you, shaping choices, guiding actions, and fostering deeper human connection. Even in casual conversations, I noticed changes. I spoke more gently, listened more attentively, and responded with understanding rather than judgment. I realized that transformation isn't a public performance, it's subtle, ongoing, and often invisible. The most profound changes happen inside, quietly altering the way you inhabit the world. Looking back, I understand now why Lily dared me to live as a woman. It wasn't a stunt. It was a lesson in humanity. It was an invitation to grow, to expand empathy, to embrace vulnerability, and to realize that strength comes in forms we often overlook. Strength is patience. Strength is listening. Strength is courage when no one is watching. I sometimes share pieces of this story with friends, carefully, to avoid judgment or misunderstanding. But I notice their reactions, curiosity, reflection, sometimes astonishment. And I hope that in some small way, it encourages them to consider empathy, perspective, and personal growth. Because the truth is, transformation isn't about appearance, it's about consciousness. It's about choosing to be a better human, one action at a time. I became a better man by living as a woman, yes, but more accurately, I became a better human. I learned to see beyond myself, to understand beyond assumptions, to feel beyond convenience. And every day since, I strive to carry that lesson into every interaction, every relationship, every choice. Because real change isn't temporary. It doesn't fade when the week ends, or the dress comes off, or the challenge concludes. Real change lingers, transforms, and grows. And I am living proof. I glance in the mirror now, not with vanity, but with gratitude. I see the same man, but layered with understanding, tempered by humility, and illuminated by empathy. I see someone who has walked in another's world, who has felt fear, vulnerability, and courage all at once. Someone who has discovered that the heart's capacity for compassion is far greater than we imagine. And as I step into each new day, I carry that knowledge, that awareness, that quiet strength. Because to be a better man, I learned, is not about what you assert, it's about what you embrace. Not about what you control, but about what you understand. Not about being fearless, but about being human. And that, I realize with full certainty, is the most profound transformation anyone can experience. The final test of my transformation came unexpectedly. One evening, as I walked home from work, I noticed a young woman arguing with a group of men on the sidewalk. Their words were sharp, aggressive, and dismissive, and I could feel the tension vibrating in the air. For a split second, I hesitated. Weeks turned into months, and I carried that awareness into every part of my life. At work, I continued to advocate for fairness and inclusion. I listened more attentively, challenged my own assumptions, and encouraged others to share their voices. Colleagues noticed the change, and it wasn't just in my words, it was in my presence, my attentiveness, my patience. At home, I became a more compassionate son and brother. I stopped dismissing the quiet struggles of my family, and I began to understand their resilience and courage. My relationships deepened in ways I hadn't imagined. Conversations became more meaningful, laughter richer, and moments of silence more comfortable. I realized that being fully human involves embracing vulnerability, and that acceptance is the most profound gift we can offer one another. Love, too, grew in subtle ways. I nurtured empathy in my romantic relationship, learning to listen beyond words, to notice the unspoken, to honor emotions rather than minimize them. I realized that love isn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations, it's about presence, attentiveness, and unwavering support. By understanding vulnerability, I was able to love more deeply, more openly, more honestly than I had ever thought possible. One quiet evening, I met with Lily again. We sat on a bench overlooking the city skyline, and she turned to me with that knowing smile. "So, what's the takeaway?" she asked. I thought for a long moment, then spoke. "The takeaway," I said slowly, "is that being a better man isn't about appearing strong or in control. It's about understanding, empathy, and courage. It's about stepping into another person's world, feeling what they feel, and carrying that understanding forward into every part of your life. That's the transformation that matters." She nodded, satisfied. "Exactly. And now, you live it." I walked home that night feeling the weight and the beauty of what I had learned. Life hadn't changed, it was still unpredictable, challenging, sometimes unfair. But I had changed. My lens had shifted. My heart had grown wider, my courage deeper, my compassion steadier. I had become someone who could see beyond appearances, beyond assumptions, beyond myself. I often think back to that week in the dress, the unfamiliar movements, the hesitant glances in the mirror, the moments of fear and exhilaration. I remember how it felt to be vulnerable, exposed, and uncertain. And I carry it still, as a reminder of what it means to be human. The moral is clear, though it's simple: to become a better person, sometimes you have to step outside yourself. To truly understand courage, empathy, and love, you have to experience life from another perspective. And in doing so, you discover that strength isn't domination, love isn't possession, and empathy isn't optional, it's essential. Now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see a man who tried on someone else's life for a week. I see a human being who dared to feel, dared to understand, and dared to act. I see someone who knows that the truest measure of character is not in what you conquer, but in what you embrace. And so I live differently. I listen more. I speak thoughtfully. I act courageously. I love openly. I notice the small struggles of others and offer help without expectation. I carry the lessons of that week with me, in every choice, every interaction, every heartbeat. I became a better man not because I lived as a woman, but because I dared to step outside my own world, to feel what others feel, and to let it change me. That is the transformation I will carry for the rest of my life. And if there's one thing I hope people take from my story, it's this: empathy, vulnerability, and understanding are not weaknesses, they are the foundation of true strength. To be human, to be compassionate, to be brave enough to feel, this is how we grow, how we love, and how we become better versions of ourselves. Because in the end, being a better man isn't about proving anything to the world. It's about proving to yourself that you can be kind when it's hard, courageous when it's frightening, and open-hearted when it's uncomfortable. And that, I've learned, is the most powerful transformation of all.